What if I told you that the day my in-laws smugly announced they'd cut me out of the family will was actually the day I'd been quietly waiting for? Picture this. One moment, you're reviewing quarterly reports in your office. The next, you're listening to your husband's family gleefully inform you that you'll inherit nothing from the family fortune. But unlike what you might expect, I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I didn't even flinch. Because while the Blackwell family thought they were delivering a crushing blow, I'd already secured the checkmate. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Rebecca Chen, and at 36, I serve as the Chief Operations Officer at Blackwell Industries, a fourth-generation manufacturing company that produces specialized industrial equipment. People come to me to solve problems, to optimize inefficient systems, to transform struggling divisions into profitable ones. Ironic, really, considering I was about to apply those same skills to my personal situation. The quarterly financial report I was reviewing that Friday afternoon showed record profits for our Asia-Pacific division, a division I had rebuilt from the ground up over the past 3 years. The numbers glowed on my computer screen as William, Blackwell Sr., my father-in-law and the company's figurehead chairman, appeared in my doorway with my husband's 2 brothers flanking him like sentries. "Rebecca, we need to speak with you regarding a family matter," William Sr. announced without preamble, his voice carrying that distinctive Blackwell authority, the tone that had intimidated business competitors for decades, but had never quite worked on me. "Of course," I replied, closing my laptop. "Please, have a seat." The 3 Blackwell men arranged themselves across from me, their expressions a curious mixture of solemnity and poorly concealed satisfaction. This impromptu family meeting was unusual. Business and family matters were typically kept strictly separate at Blackwell Industries, one of the many traditions I'd found archaic when I first married into the family 8 years ago. William cleared his throat with the deliberate gravitas he brought to all family pronouncements. "As you know, Eleanor and I have been updating our estate planning." I nodded. My mother-in-law's recent health scare had accelerated their need to finalize succession plans I'd been subtly influencing for years. "We've made some decisions regarding the distribution of family assets, and we felt it was appropriate to inform you directly." The slight upturn at the corner of James's mouth, my husband's older brother and the current CEO, told me everything I needed to know about what was coming. "You will, of course, continue to receive your salary and benefits as COO," William continued, "but we've decided that all family assets, including controlling shares in Blackwell Industries, will pass exclusively to blood relatives." He paused, watching for my reaction. "I'm sure you understand that family tradition dictates we keep ownership within the direct Blackwell line." Michael, my husband's younger brother and the company's CFO, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. At least one of them had the decency to feel awkward about ambushing me with this news in my own office. The financial report on my desk didn't tremble. My expression remained neutral. The only sign that I'd registered their announcement was a slight tilt of my head as I processed the information. Then, surprisingly, I smiled. Because while William Sr. thought he was delivering a devastating blow, he'd actually just triggered the final phase of a plan I'd been orchestrating for the past 4 years. "I appreciate your directness," I said, my voice steady. "Family succession. Planning is certainly important. Is there anything else you wanted to discuss?" My calm reaction wasn't what they had expected. James frowned, his anticipation of witnessing my distress denied. "That's it?" he asked. "You have nothing else to say?" I met his gaze evenly. "What would you like me to say, James? That I'm surprised? We all know that would be disingenuous. The Blackwell family's preference for traditional succession has never been a secret." William Sr. nodded approvingly, mistaking my response for resignation. "I'm glad you understand, Rebecca. Business is business, but family is family. As they rose to leave, satisfied with their mission accomplished, I returned to my quarterly. Reports without another word. The manufacturing operation in Singapore had exceeded production targets by 18% under the new system I'd implemented. Our Malaysian distribution center had cut costs by 23% following my restructuring. The Australian sales team had secured 3 major contracts using the proposal templates I'd developed. Each page of data represented systems and relationships I had built while the Blackwell men were focused on maintaining their family hierarchy. My phone buzzed with a message from Thomas, my assistant. "The board documents are ready for your review. Also, Ms. Watkins from legal called. The proxy. Paperwork is complete." Perfect timing. I responded with a simple "thank you" and continued working as if my personal and professional future hadn't just been directly threatened. Because in reality, it hadn't been. The Blackwells had just made the final mistake in a long series of underestimations that had begun the day I married into their family. When I first met Andrew Blackwell at a charity gala in Chicago 8 years ago, I was already a successful management consultant specializing in operational restructuring for manufacturing companies. He was charming, intelligent, and refreshingly direct about his family's business challenges. Our courtship was swift and passionate, a whirlwind romance that culminated in a wedding that made the society pages despite my modest background and Chinese-American heritage. The Blackwell family had accepted me with polite reservation, viewing me as an unusual but potentially useful addition to their dynasty. Within 6 months of our marriage, William Sr. had offered me a position as operations manager for their struggling West Coast division. "We could use your expertise," he'd said, though the unspoken sentiment was clear. It would be inappropriate for a Blackwell spouse to work for a competitor, and they could keep a closer eye on me within the family. Business. What they hadn't anticipated was how thoroughly I would transform that struggling division, turning it from a financial drain into a profit center within 18 months. My promotion to Director of Operations had been reluctant but necessary, given the results I'd achieved. My subsequent elevation to COO 3 years ago had been met with family tension but board enthusiasm. Throughout it all, I'd maintained a careful balance, demonstrating exceptional value to the company while never directly challenging the family's perception of their own superiority. I'd learned early that the Blackwells responded better to results they believed they had facilitated than to direct challenges to their authority. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The door to my office opened again, this time revealing Andrew, my husband and the company's Chief Innovation Officer. Unlike his father and brothers, his expression held concern rather than satisfaction. "Rebecca, I just heard what happened. I wanted to make sure you're okay." Andrew had always been different from the rest of his family, more creative than calculating, more interested in developing new products than in accumulating power. It was what had drawn me to him initially, though our relationship had evolved in ways neither of us had anticipated. "I'm fine," I assured him, gesturing for him to close the door. "Your father's announcement wasn't unexpected." Andrew settled into the chair across from my desk, running a hand through his prematurely graying hair, a genetic gift from the Blackwell line that had always made him look distinguished, even in his 30s. "I tried to talk them out of it, especially the way they decided to tell you. It was unnecessarily theatrical." I studied my husband's face, noting the genuine regret in his eyes. Our marriage had weathered significant challenges, from family interference to the heartbreak of infertility, to Andrew's brief affair 3 years ago. We'd emerged not stronger in the traditional sense, but with a clearer understanding of each other. We'd developed an unusual partnership based on mutual respect and pragmatic collaboration rather than the fairy tale romance we'd started with. "Did you know they were updating the will?" I asked. Andrew nodded. I knew they were making changes after Mom's health scare. I didn't know they were planning to explicitly exclude you until yesterday. He hesitated. Father framed it as protecting the company's future and maintaining family tradition. James was particularly insistent. Of course he was. James had viewed me as a threat from the moment I transformed my first failing division. His position as heir apparent had seemed less certain with each successful project I completed. And, "How do you feel about it?" I asked, my tone conversational despite the weight of the question. Andrew and I had learned to have difficult conversations with remarkable directness over the years. He met my gaze. "I think it's short-sighted and unnecessarily cruel. I told them as much." He paused. "I also reminded them that my own shares will eventually pass to you if anything happens to me, regardless of their wishes." Father didn't appreciate that observation. I allowed myself a small smile at the thought of William Sr.'s reaction. No, I imagine he wouldn't. Andrew owned 12% of Blackwell Industries directly, shares he'd inherited from his grandfather that weren't held in the family trust. It wasn't controlling interest, but it was significant. What William Sr. and James didn't know was that Andrew's shares were just one piece of a much larger puzzle I'd been quietly assembling. "What are you going to do?" Andrew asked, genuinely curious. In our reconstructed marriage, we'd developed a strange honesty with each other. He knew I wouldn't accept this situation passively, just as I knew he wouldn't actively oppose his family unless forced to choose. "For now, nothing dramatic," I replied. "I'll continue doing my job exceptionally well, just as I always have." Andrew nodded, recognizing my non-answer for what it was, an acknowledgement that I had plans I wasn't ready to share. As he left my office, I returned to the financial reports that had been interrupted. Each page represented not just business success but strategic positioning I'd engineered over 4 years. The Singapore operation that now manufactured 40% of our core products. The distribution network I'd rebuilt across Asia. The European partnerships I'd cultivated that had opened markets previously dominated by our competitors. Each initiative had been presented as supporting the Blackwell family vision while actually creating structures that operated independently of their direct control. My phone rang. Diane Watkins, our corporate counsel, and more importantly, my ally. I'd identified Diane early as someone whose brilliance the Blackwell men consistently underestimated because she lacked the pedigree they respected. Like me, she'd built her position through undeniable results rather than connections. "Rebecca, I've finalized the documents we discussed. Do you want me to bring them by your office?" "Not yet," I replied. "Let's wait until after the board meeting next week. How are the preparations coming for the Singapore structure?" Diane's voice carried a hint of satisfaction. "Everything is in place. The holding company has been established with the ownership structure exactly as you specified. All perfectly legal and virtually invisible unless someone knows precisely where to look." I thanked her and ended the call, feeling the steady calm that comes from years of careful preparation. The rest of the afternoon passed with methodical productivity. I cleared my desk of routine approvals, held a video conference with our Australian team, and reviewed the presentation for next week's board meeting. To anyone observing, I appeared to be having a completely normal workday. Focused, efficient, unperturbed. Inside, I was mapping the accelerated timeline that William Sr.'s announcement had necessitated. Pieces that had been positioned over years would now need to move in careful sequence. As I prepared to leave the office, James appeared in my doorway once again. Unlike his father's formal approach or Andrew's genuine concern, James carried himself with the barely concealed hostility that had characterized our relationship since my promotion to COO. "Rebecca, a word?" Without waiting for a response, he entered and closed the door behind him. "I want to make sure we understand each other after this morning's conversation." I set down my bag and regarded him with polite attention. "Of course. James, what's on your mind?" He settled into the chair across from me, attempting to project authority despite technically being my peer rather than my superior in the company structure. Father may have his traditional views about family and succession, but I want to be perfectly clear about the business reality. Your position here is secure as long as you continue to perform. This isn't personal. The irony of his statement was almost amusing. Everything was personal with James. I appreciate the clarification, I replied evenly. As I told your father, I understand the family's position on succession. My commitment is to Blackwell Industries and its continued success. James studied me, seemingly frustrated by my composure. He'd expected tears, anger, or at least some bargaining. My calm acceptance denied him the emotional leverage he'd been seeking. Good, he said finally. The board meeting next week will include a discussion about restructuring some of your direct reports. Nothing major, just some adjustments to streamline decision-making. And there it was, the first move in what would likely be a campaign to gradually reduce my authority within the company. Classic James, never confronting issues directly when he could instead slowly undermine and isolate his targets. I look forward to the discussion, I responded. I have some restructuring proposals of my own to present. His eyes narrowed slightly. What kind of proposals? I smiled. Nothing major, just some adjustments to streamline decision-making, particularly in our international operations. I was quoting his words back to him deliberately, and his expression showed he recognized the challenge. I'll see you at the board meeting, he said curtly, standing to leave. I nodded pleasantly, as if we'd just concluded a perfectly cordial conversation between colleagues. After James left, I locked my office and headed to the parking garage. The late April evening was unseasonably warm, with Chicago's skyline glowing against the darkening sky. As I drove home to the lakefront condo Andrew and I had purchased 4 years ago, against his family's advice to buy in the traditional Gold Coast neighborhood, I allowed myself to fully process the day's events. William Sr.'s smug announcement, James's thinly veiled threats, Andrew's conflicted loyalty. All exactly as I had anticipated, though the timeline had accelerated. The condominium building's familiar modern architecture came into view, another choice that had subtly defied Blackwell tradition. The doorman greeted me by name as I entered, and the elevator whisked me to the 32nd floor. Our home, a space I had designed to be both serene and functional, welcomed me with floor-to-ceiling views of Lake Michigan. I kicked off my heels and poured myself a glass of Pinot Noir, carrying it to the window to watch the last colors of sunset fade across the water. My phone buzzed with a text from Andrew. Dinner with Dad and James tonight. Don't wait up. No surprise there. They would be strategizing, planning next steps based on my unexpectedly calm reaction to their announcement. What they didn't know was that I'd been anticipating this moment for years. Ever since I discovered, quite by accident, their discussions about eventually pushing me out of the company when the time was right. I moved to my home office and opened my laptop, accessing a secure server that contained the documents I'd been compiling for 4 years. Financial reports, email exchanges, corporate registrations, international business licenses. The complete architecture of the changes I'd implemented throughout Blackwell Industries, changes that appeared to strengthen the company as a whole, but had actually created a carefully constructed network of interdependencies centered around operations I personally controlled. At the very back of my digital archives was something the Blackwell men would truly appreciate, if they were still the shrewd businessmen their grandfather had been. A series of holding company structures, offshore accounts, and proxy arrangements that, when activated, would effectively transfer controlling interest in Blackwell Industries' most profitable divisions to entities I managed, regardless of who technically owned the parent company's shares. All legal, all ethical, all documented and approved in board meetings the Blackwells had attended but never fully understood. When I'd discovered that the family had been discussing my eventual removal, Years ago, I hadn't confronted them or even changed my behavior. Instead, I'd done what I do best. I solved the problem systematically, building alternative structures and contingency plans while continuing to increase the company's profitability. Each success had made me more valuable, each achievement had given me more operational authority, and each restructuring had subtly shifted actual control away from nominal ownership. I sipped my wine and reviewed the presentation I'd prepared for next week's board meeting. The proposed global operations alignment looked on the surface like a standard corporate reorganization to improve efficiency. What it actually represented was the final piece of a puzzle that would make Blackwell Industries utterly dependent on the international infrastructure I'd built. Infrastructure that operated under contractual obligations that would remain in force regardless of any changes in my employment status. My phone rang again. This time it was Victoria Kane, my former colleague from consulting days and now a board member at Blackwell Industries. Her appointment had been my suggestion, pitched to William Sr. as bringing in valuable outside perspective, when in reality she was one of the few people who fully understood what I had been building. "I heard about the family meeting," she said, without preamble when I answered. "James has been calling board members trying to build support for limiting your authority." "Right on schedule," I replied. "How's the reception been?" Victoria's laugh carried a note of satisfaction. "Mixed. The independent directors are skeptical about making changes when your divisions are outperforming all others. Even Gary Williams, who usually votes with the family, asked why they'd want to restructure the most profitable operations in the company." "And what's your assessment of next week?" I asked, though I already had a good idea. Victoria had been instrumental in helping me understand the board dynamics from the beginning. William Sr. and James have the family trust votes, obviously. They'll likely get Gary's support out of loyalty. The other 4 independent directors will vote based on business merit, which currently favors you overwhelmingly. It's going to come down to Andrew and Margaret. Margaret Blackwell Hines was William Sr.'s daughter, who typically stayed out of operational decisions but controlled 7% of the voting shares. "Thank you for the intelligence," I said. "I'll see you next week." After hanging up, I returned to the window, watching the lights of boats moving across the darkened lake. A strange calm had settled over me. The same feeling I'd experienced years ago when I first realized that my in-laws saw me as useful, but ultimately expendable. Not anger, not hurt, but a cool determination to create systems that would function regardless of their personal feelings toward me. The condominium door opened as Andrew returned from his dinner earlier than expected. His expression was troubled as he loosened his tie and poured himself a scotch. "That was uncomfortable," he said, joining me at the window. "Dad and James spent 2 hours explaining why the will decision was necessary and how they plan to gradually transition you to a role with less operational control but more strategic input." He made air quotes around the corporate euphemism. "Basically, they want to move you sideways into a position with a good title but no actual authority." I nodded, unsurprised. "And when do they plan to implement this transition?" Andrew sighed. "After the European expansion is complete. They need you until then." James actually said, and I quote, "We need her to finish setting up the systems, then we can manage them ourselves." The statement was so perfectly aligned with their fundamental misunderstanding of what I had built that I couldn't help but smile. They still thought of operations as something that could be designed, implemented, and then simply maintained, not as the living, evolving networks of relationships and interdependencies I had actually created. "And what did you say?" I asked, genuinely curious about where Andrew stood in this family dynamic. He met my gaze directly. "I told them I thought it was a mistake from both a business and a personal perspective. I reminded them that you've doubled international profitability in 3 years. Dad said that was impressive, but not irreplaceable." Andrew shook his head. "When I pointed out that no one else in the company understands the new Asian operations as well as you do, James said they could hire consultants if necessary." I took another sip of wine, allowing the information to settle. William Sr. and James weren't just planning to cut me out of the family inheritance. They were actively plotting to remove me from operational control once they'd extracted maximum value from my work. It was exactly the scenario I'd prepared for. Triggered, exactly as I had expected. "Rebecca," Andrew said softly, "I want you to know I don't support this. What you've built at Blackwell is extraordinary." I studied my husband's face in the dim light. Our relationship had evolved from passionate romance to bitter conflict to, finally, a pragmatic partnership with clear boundaries and expectations. After his affair 3 years ago, we'd made a decision to rebuild our marriage on different terms: honesty about our ambitions, respect for each other's independence, and a clear understanding that loyalty needed to be earned rather than assumed. "I appreciate that," I said simply. "What happens next will depend on choices each of us makes." Andrew nodded, understanding the layers in my statement. "I know you've prepared for this. I've watched you building something these past few years that Dad and James don't fully comprehend." He hesitated. "Whatever you do next, just tell me before it happens. No surprises?" It was a reasonable request from someone who had, despite his family's influence, generally treated me with respect as a professional, even when our personal relationship was strained. "I'll give you fair warning," I promised. "The board meeting next Thursday will be significant. You might want to prepare yourself." He accepted this with a nod, not asking for details I wasn't ready to share. This was our new normal: direct communication without the expectation of complete transparency. We'd found that this honest acknowledgement of our separate interests actually worked better than the pretense of perfect unity had ever done. We stayed by the window a while longer, drinking in companionable silence and watching the lake. 8 years ago, we'd been madly in love, envisioning a future of perfect partnership both personally and professionally. Reality had proven more complicated. The Blackwell family's dynastic expectations had proven incompatible with my professional ambitions. Our inability to have children had strained what the family already viewed as a questionable match. Andrew's affair with a family friend had nearly ended our marriage entirely. What had emerged from those challenges wasn't the relationship either of us had originally envisioned, but it was one that worked on its own terms. We were allies more than passionate partners now, with clearly defined boundaries and expectations. We both brought valuable perspectives and skills to our shared life. And most importantly, we had learned to navigate conflict with honesty rather than manipulation. A stark contrast to the Blackwell family's typical approach. As we prepared for bed, moving through the comfortable routines of a long-established relationship, I thought about the path that had led me here. From the ambitious consultant who had fallen for Andrew's charm to the strategic operator who had transformed Blackwell Industries while preparing for the betrayal I had long anticipated. The Blackwells had never truly accepted me as one of their own, but they had given me something far more valuable than family membership. They had given me the opportunity to build systems and structures that would long outlast their control. Tomorrow would bring the first moves in the accelerated endgame. Preparations that had been positioned over years would now activate in careful sequence. William Sr. and James would continue strategizing ways to remove me from operational control, once they'd extracted maximum value from my work. Andrew would navigate his conflicted loyalties, and I would execute the contingency plans I'd been building since the day I first discovered that my position in the company and the family had always been conditional. The Blackwells had made a fundamental error in their calculations. They had viewed me as merely ambitious rather than strategic, as technically skilled rather than visionary. They had assumed that because I didn't challenge them directly, I wasn't building alternative power structures. Most critically, they had believed that their legal ownership of company shares equated to actual control of company operations. They were about to discover how wrong they had been. The next morning dawned with Chicago's signature spring unpredictability: sunshine, breaking through rain clouds, much like my own situation. I rose early, following the disciplined routine that had served me throughout my career. 5-mile run along the lakefront, protein smoothie, review of overnight emails from our Asian operations. By 7:15, I was dressed in one of my carefully selected power suits, a structured Armani in deep navy that projected authority without ostentation. The Blackwells appreciated old money aesthetics, which I acknowledged without fully embracing. As I drove to the office, my mind mapped the series of meetings that would fill my day. Each one represented a checkpoint in the acceleration of plans I'd designed to unfold over months rather than days. The drive gave me time to center myself, to focus on execution rather than emotion. Because ultimately, this wasn't about hurt, feelings, or family rejection. It was about recognizing reality and responding with strategic precision rather than reactive pain. I arrived at Blackwell Industries' downtown headquarters by 7:45, early enough to have the executive floor mostly to myself. The building itself reflected the company's evolution, an Art Deco core with modern additions, tradition wrapped in contemporary necessity. My heels clicked against marble as I made my way to my office, the sound echoing in the quiet morning space. Thomas, my assistant, was already at his desk despite the early hour. His loyalty wasn't just to Blackwell Industries, but specifically to the operational transformation we'd created together. "Good morning," he greeted me, handing over a leather portfolio. "I've prepared the files for your Singapore call, and Ms. Watkins asked if you could meet her at 9 SAR instead of 9:30. I thanked him and took the portfolio, appreciating his efficiency and discretion. Thomas had been with me for 3 years, recruited from our Australian operations after demonstrating exceptional organizational skills and, more importantly, the ability to maintain confidentiality amid corporate politics. My office, a corner space with views of the Chicago River, stood as a physical representation of my achieved position within Blackwell Industries. When I'd first joined as operations manager, I'd been given a windowless interior office despite my status as a family member by marriage. Each promotion had brought better accommodations, culminating in this space that had once belonged to William Sr. himself before he semi-retired to the chairman's more ceremonial office down the hall. The Blackwells hadn't realized the symbolism of giving me this particular space, or perhaps they had, assuming it demonstrated their acceptance of me. Either way, I'd made it mine, replacing heavy traditional furniture with cleaner contemporary pieces while respectfully maintaining certain historical elements. At 8 WOW sharp, my computer chimed with an incoming video call from Vincent Chen, the director of our Singapore manufacturing facility. Vincent's face appeared on screen, his expression professionally neutral despite the early hour in Singapore. "Good evening, Rebecca," he greeted me, acknowledging the 12-hour time difference. "I've reviewed the implementation timeline you sent. We're prepared to execute whenever you give the word." "Thank you, Vincent. Let's plan for Phase 1 immediately following the board meeting next week. Have you encountered any resistance from regional management?" Vincent shook his head. "None. The restructuring appears completely aligned with our efficiency initiatives. No one has recognized the underlying implications." This was exactly as I'd designed it. Operational changes that served legitimate business purposes while simultaneously creating the infrastructure for my contingency plans. After concluding the call, I reviewed the presentation for the upcoming board meeting one final time. Every slide represented months of careful positioning, each recommendation supported by irrefutable data. The proposed global operations alignment would consolidate international manufacturing and distribution under a streamlined management structure, which happened to be primarily located outside the U.S., and staffed with executives loyal to me, rather than the Blackwell name. The financial projections showed significant cost savings and efficiency improvements. What they didn't explicitly show was how this restructuring would create operational dependencies that would make it nearly impossible to remove me without severely disrupting the company's most profitable divisions. At 9 check, Diane Watkins arrived. At my office, closing the door behind her. At 52, Diane had navigated corporate law for decades, developing a reputation for finding creative but legal solutions to complex business challenges. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a sleek bun, her expression revealing nothing to casual observers. "The Singapore Holding Company documentation is complete," she said without preamble, placing a thumb drive on my desk. "Everything has been structured exactly as discussed." I picked up the drive, this small object representing years of careful legal engineering. "And the operational contracts?" Diane's slight smile conveyed satisfaction. "All executed and filed, the agreements between Blackwell Global Operations and the regional entities contain the exact language we discussed. If anyone attempts to remove you as COO without specific performance cause, the exclusive operational licenses automatically transfer to the Singapore Holding Company." The arrangement was elegant in its simplicity. I had structured the international operations so that the intellectual property, operational processes, and key client relationships were held by entities that would remain under my control regardless of my employment status. "And it's all legally sound?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Diane had been meticulously building these structures alongside me for years. "Completely. Every agreement has been properly executed and approved through appropriate channels. The Blackwells signed off on each component, though I doubt they fully understood how the pieces fit together." This had been our greatest advantage. William Sr. and James considered themselves strategic thinkers, but rarely examined operational details, viewing them as beneath their executive perspective. They had approved my recommendations based on impressive performance metrics without questioning the underlying structures. After Diane left, I spent the next 2 hours on conference calls with our European teams, reviewing the status of our expansion into Eastern European markets. Each conversation confirmed what I already knew. The international operations I had built functioned as a cohesive network with me as the central node. The regional directors understood their individual markets, but relied on my guidance to coordinate cross-border activities. The relationships I had cultivated couldn't simply be transferred to a replacement executive, regardless of what William Sr. and James might believe. At noon, I had a scheduled lunch with Margaret Blackwell Hines, William Sr.'s daughter and the family member who had always treated me with the most genuine respect. Unlike her brothers, Margaret had built a career outside Blackwell Industries, developing a successful architectural firm before returning to take a limited role on the company's board. Her 7% ownership stake made her a crucial vote in any significant company decisions, and her independence from day-to-day operations gave her a more objective perspective on the business. We met at a small French bistro several blocks from headquarters, neutral territory away from family politics. Margaret arrived a few minutes late, her artistic sensibilities evident in her asymmetrical haircut and architect's eye for structural clothing. "Rebecca," she greeted me warmly, kissing my cheek before sitting down. "I've been hoping to catch up with you. It's been too long since we've had a proper conversation." "It has," I agreed, genuinely fond of my sister-in-law despite the family complications. "How are the boys?" Margaret's twin sons were studying at universities on opposite coasts, one pursuing film at USC, the other engineering at MIT. "Thriving. In their own ways," she replied with maternal pride. "Jake's film just won a student festival award, and Ethan's research team got another grant." She studied me over her menu. "But I suspect this lunch isn't primarily about family updates." I appreciated her directness. It had always been one of her best qualities. "I imagine you've heard about your father's estate planning decisions." Margaret set down her menu with a sigh. "I have, and about the board maneuvers James is attempting. Neither sits well with me for what that's worth." The waiter arrived to take our orders, providing a moment to consider my approach. Margaret wasn't just a board vote. She was possibly the only Blackwell who saw me as a person rather than an asset or a threat. "What's the justification they're giving you?" I asked after the waiter departed. Margaret took a sip of water, choosing her words carefully. "Dad's using the family tradition argument. Blackwell assets passing through bloodlines. James is being more direct, claiming you've built parallel power structures that threaten family control." She met my gaze evenly. "He's not entirely wrong about that part, is he?" The question wasn't accusatory, but astutely perceptive. I respected her enough to offer honesty. "I've built efficient operational systems that serve the company's interests. The fact that those systems are centered around expertise rather than family position is a feature, not a bug." Margaret nodded, understanding the careful phrasing. "And the fact that those systems would be difficult to maintain without you at the helm is just an operational reality, not a power play?" I allowed myself a small smile at her perception. "Exactly. Good systems are designed around capabilities, not individuals. The international operations require certain expertise and relationships to function effectively. Whether that expertise comes from me or someone else is secondary to maintaining operational integrity." This was both completely true and carefully incomplete. The systems would indeed function without me, but the legal structures ensured they would function under my direction regardless of my title at Blackwell Industries. Our food arrived, and we spent a few minutes on lighter topics before Margaret returned to the central issue. "Rebecca, I need to understand your position before the board meeting. What's your ideal outcome here?" It was a fair question from someone who would need to cast a vote. "My ideal outcome is continued operational excellence that serves the company's long-term interests," I replied. "The global operations alignment I'm proposing will improve efficiency and profitability across all international divisions." "And if Dad and James oppose it?" Margaret pressed. "If they try to limit your authority or even remove you?" I met her gaze directly. "Then they'll need to consider the operational consequences of those actions. The international infrastructure doesn't run on family name. It runs on relationships and systems I've established. Disrupting those would have significant financial implications." I wasn't threatening, merely stating business reality in terms Margaret would understand as a board member with fiduciary responsibilities. She studied me thoughtfully. "You've prepared for this, haven't you? All these years while they were underestimating you, you were building something they don't fully understand." There was respect in her observation, perhaps even a hint of admiration. "I've done my job exceptionally well," I replied simply. "Creating sustainable operational systems is what you all hired me to do." As lunch concluded, Margaret touched my arm gently. "For what it's worth, I've always thought the family's inability to fully embrace you was their loss. What you've built at Blackwell Industries is remarkable." Her words carried genuine appreciation, a reminder that not every family relationship had been defined by calculation or control. "Thank you, Margaret. Your perspective has always meant a lot to me." Back at the office, the afternoon brought a series of operational meetings, reviewing production schedules, approving capital expenditures, addressing quality control issues at our Detroit facility. I moved through each with focused efficiency, compartmentalizing the personal dynamics to concentrate on business requirements. To my team, I appeared exactly as I always did: decisive, analytical, solutions-oriented. They had no way of knowing that each decision now served dual purposes, both addressing immediate business needs and positioning pieces for what would come after the board meeting. At 3:30, Michael Blackwell, the youngest brother and CFO, appeared at my office door. Unlike James's aggressive confidence or William Sr.'s patriarchal authority, Michael had always projected a more conflicted energy. As the family member, most directly engaged with financial details, he was perhaps the only Blackwell who partially understood what I had been building. "Do you have a minute?" he asked, his expression suggesting this wasn't a routine financial discussion. "Of course," I replied, gesturing to the chairs across from my desk. "What can I help with?" Michael closed the door and sat down, his discomfort evident in his posture. "I've been reviewing the financial structures for the Asian operations in preparation for the board meeting," he began, choosing his words carefully. "There are aspects of the holding company arrangements that seem unusually complex." I maintained a neutral expression, though internally I acknowledged that Michael's financial acumen made him the most likely to spot the patterns in my design. International operations often require more complex structures for tax efficiency and regulatory compliance, I offered. "Is there something specific you're concerned about?" Michael hesitated, clearly struggling with family loyalty versus financial oversight responsibilities. "The licensing agreements between Blackwell Industries and Blackwell Global Operations. The terms seem extremely favorable to BGO, particularly the exclusivity clauses and termination provisions." He was right to note these details. They were central to my contingency planning. The licensing agreements ensured that Blackwell Industries' products could only be manufactured and distributed internationally through entities that would remain under my effective control, regardless of board decisions about my employment. "Those provisions protect our international operations from disruption," I explained. "They ensure continuity for our customers and partners regardless of any management changes. The board approved all those terms 2 years ago as part of our Asian expansion." This was factually true, though I knew the board hadn't scrutinized the implications as carefully as Michael was doing now. "I'm happy to walk through the business rationale for each provision if that would be helpful." Michael studied me, seeming to realize there were layers to my explanation he wasn't fully grasping. "The international operations have become our largest profit center," he said finally. "These agreements effectively make those profits dependent on structures you've created." It wasn't quite an accusation, but the implication was clear. "They make those profits dependent on operational excellence," I corrected gently, "which is exactly what the company asked me to deliver." After Michael left, visibly unsettled by our conversation, I received a text from Andrew. "Dad has called an emergency family dinner tonight. All Blackwells required. Something about unified strategy for the board meeting." I responded with a simple, "Thanks for the heads up," and returned to my work. The accelerated timeline was unfolding exactly as I had anticipated. The family, circling wagons while still underestimating the comprehensiveness of my preparations. At 5:30, I met with Thomas to review the next day's schedule. "I've reorganized your meetings to allow more time for the calls with our European partners," he informed me. Also, Mr. Chen from Singapore requested a follow-up at 8 p.m. our time. I thanked him, appreciating his attention to details that would become increasingly important over the coming days. "Thomas, things may become complicated after the board meeting next week. I want you to know that I value your contributions regardless of any organizational changes that might occur." He nodded, understanding the subtext of my statement. "My loyalty is to the operational infrastructure we've built, Ms. Chen. I believe in what we've created." His response confirmed what I had long suspected, that the team I had assembled was committed to our operational vision rather than to Blackwell family authority. This loyalty to systems rather than surnames would prove crucial in the coming transition. As the office emptied for the evening, I remained at my desk, reviewing the final components of my strategy. Each piece had been positioned years in advance, creating a comprehensive framework that appeared to serve Blackwell Industries' interests while actually building my independent operational control. The licensing agreements that Michael had questioned, the holding company structures Diane had constructed, the loyalty of regional directors who reported to me rather than to Chicago headquarters, all formed an invisible infrastructure that would activate the moment William Sr. and James attempted to remove me from operational authority. My phone chimed with an email from Elena Vasquez, my personal attorney who had been working separately from Diane to ensure my individual interests were protected. Final documents prepared as requested. Ready for signature whenever you give the word. This represented the last safeguard. Legal protection for my personal position regardless of corporate outcomes. Not because I doubted my strategy, but because thorough preparation had always been my approach to every challenge. As darkness fell over Chicago, I finally left the office, driving home through evening traffic while mentally reviewing each component of tomorrow's activities. The Blackwell family would be gathering for their strategy dinner, planning how to limit my authority while maintaining the operational performance I had created. They still didn't understand that those two objectives were fundamentally incompatible, that the international operations functioned precisely because I had designed them around my expertise and relationships rather than around traditional corporate hierarchies. When I arrived home, the condo was empty. Andrew still at the family dinner where they would be discussing my fate without realizing I had already determined it myself. I changed into more comfortable clothes and poured a glass of wine, carrying it to my home office where I had one final task to complete before tomorrow. On my personal laptop, I accessed a secure server containing documents I had compiled over 4 years, emails, meeting notes, financial analyses, and strategic plans that tracked my systematic building of operational control. The most important file was a simple flowchart showing how the various entities I had created interrelated. Blackwell Global Operations in Singapore, which held the exclusive manufacturing licenses. Blackwell International Distribution in the Netherlands, which controlled access to European and Asian markets. Blackwell Innovation Partners in California, which owned key patents and process improvements, each entity legally established, properly approved by the board, and structured to remain under my effective control, regardless of my employment status at Blackwell Industries itself. I took a sip of wine, studying the elegant simplicity of the design. Not illegal, not even unethical, simply a careful application of business principles to protect the operational excellence I had created. The Blackwells had spent generations building a company based on family control. I had spent 4 years building operational systems based on expertise and relationships. When those two approaches inevitably collided next week, only one would prove sustainable in the modern business environment. The sound of the front door announced Andrew's return from the family dinner. He appeared in my office doorway, loosening his tie with a weary expression. "That was brutal," he said, pouring himself a scotch from the bar cart in the corner. Dad and James spent 3 hours outlining their strategy to transition operational authority while maintaining your valuable input. He made air quotes around the corporate euphemism. They're planning to create a new position, Chief International Advisor, with no direct reports and no actual authority. I nodded, unsurprised by the predictable approach. And how did they justify this restructuring to the family? Andrew took a long sip of his scotch. James presented it as necessary consolidation of family control over core assets. Dad talked about respecting your contributions while ensuring proper succession planning. Michael actually questioned whether disrupting the international operations was wise given their profitability, but he was overruled. "And Margaret?" I asked, curious about my sister-in-law's position after our lunch conversation. Andrew's expression shifted slightly. Margaret was the surprise of the evening. She asked pointed questions about the operational implications of removing you from authority. When James dismissed her concerns, she reminded everyone that she sits on the board as an independent director with fiduciary responsibilities, not just as a family member. The information confirmed my assessment of Margaret's position. She would evaluate the situation based on business merit rather than family loyalty. "What happens next, Rebecca?" Andrew asked, studying me with genuine curiosity. In our reconstructed relationship, we had developed a strange honesty with each other, acknowledging our separate interests while maintaining mutual respect. "The board meeting will proceed as scheduled," I replied. "I'll present the global operations alignment, plan exactly as prepared. The board will make its decisions based on the information presented." Andrew recognized the careful phrasing for what it was, technically accurate while deliberately incomplete. And if the board votes to approve this new advisory position? If they remove your operational authority? I met his gaze directly. Then the contingency measures I've put in place over the past 4 years will activate. I didn't elaborate further, but I didn't need to. Andrew had watched me building these systems, even if he hadn't fully understood their purpose until now. Whatever happens, he said finally, I want you to know I respect what you've built. The company is stronger because of your work, regardless of what Dad and James might think. His acknowledgement wasn't just personal, it was professional recognition, from someone who understood the business well enough to evaluate my contributions objectively. Thank you, I replied simply. That means more than you might realize. As we prepared for bed, moving through the familiar routines of our marriage, I reflected on how far we had come from the passionate young couple who had believed love could overcome family dynamics and corporate politics. The challenges we had faced, infertility, his affair, my systematic building of independent power, had transformed our relationship into something neither of us had initially envisioned, but which functioned on its own unique terms. We had learned to be honest about our separate interests while maintaining respect for each other's capabilities. Tomorrow would bring another day of careful preparation. The board meeting was still a week away, but each day until then would require precise execution of plans long established. The Blackwells would continue their family strategizing, believing they were preparing to gracefully transition me out of operational authority. I would continue my methodical work, knowing that the structures I had built would ensure that operational authority remained with me regardless of titles or family decisions. As I drifted toward sleep, I felt none of the anxiety or resentment that might be expected under the circumstances. Instead, I experienced the calm certainty that comes from thorough preparation meeting clear-eyed reality. The Blackwells had made their choice when they decided to exclude me from the family inheritance and limit my corporate authority. I had made mine when I decided to build systems that would function regardless of their personal feelings toward William. Next week's board meeting wouldn't be a confrontation, it would be a revelation. The week before the board meeting unfolded with methodical precision, each day bringing me closer to the culmination of 4 years' preparation. Monday morning arrived with a clarity that only comes from absolute certainty in one's position. I moved through the day's meetings with focused efficiency, addressing operational challenges across 3 continents while simultaneously preparing the ground for what would follow. To my team, I appeared exactly as I always did, decisive, analytical, solutions-oriented. Only I knew that each decision now served the dual purpose of immediate business needs and strategic positioning. By Tuesday afternoon, rumors had begun circulating throughout the executive floor. Corporate environments function like sophisticated ecosystems, with information flowing through invisible networks regardless of attempts to contain it. The whispers reached me through Thomas, who had cultivated his own web of connections throughout the organization. There's talk about a major restructuring announcement at the board meeting, he informed me discreetly during our afternoon check-in. Several executives have mentioned being approached about new reporting structures. I nodded, unsurprised, that James had already begun laying groundwork for the transition he believed would occur. Thank you for the information. Please continue monitoring the situation. Thomas hesitated, then added, People are asking questions about the international operations, whether changes here would affect their autonomy. This was exactly as I had anticipated. The regional directors understood that their operational effectiveness depended on the systems I had established, and they were naturally concerned about potential disruption. Please assure them that operational continuity remains my highest priority, I responded. The structures we've built are designed to withstand organizational changes. It was a carefully crafted statement, technically accurate while deliberately incomplete. The regional teams would indeed continue operating effectively, but not because they were immune to organizational changes. Rather, because the legal Frameworks I had established ensured that operational control would remain with me regardless of corporate title. Wednesday brought a scheduled video conference with our European leadership team. Directors from 6 countries gathered to discuss the expansion into Eastern European markets. The faces on my screen represented relationships I had carefully cultivated over 3 years, executives who had thrived under the autonomous regional model I had implemented. After covering the official agenda items, Martin Keller, our German operations director, raised the question everyone was thinking about. Rebecca, we've heard rumors about potential leadership changes at headquarters. Should we be concerned about impacts to our operating model? The question was direct but respectful, characteristic of the professional culture I had established in our international divisions. I met his gaze through the camera with calm assurance. Martin, I've always been transparent with this team about business realities. Yes, there are discussions about organizational structure happening at headquarters. However, the operating model we've built together is designed specifically to maintain regional autonomy, regardless of any changes in Chicago. I paused, allowing the careful phrasing to register. The legal frameworks, operational processes, and business relationships we've established will continue functioning as designed regardless of titles or reporting lines. The subtle shift in their expressions told me they understood the subtext of my message. These were sophisticated executives who had risen through global corporations. They recognized the difference between nominal authority in an organizational chart and actual operational control through systems and relationships. Stefan Kovac, our Eastern European director, nodded slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement from someone who had navigated political transitions in his home country of Slovenia and understood how power functioned beyond official designations. Thursday morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual, planning to review the final presentation for tomorrow's board meeting. The quiet of the executive floor at 6:30 a.m. provided a rare opportunity for uninterrupted focus. I had just settled at my desk when my office door opened to reveal William Blackwell Sr., his presence at this hour as unexpected as it was significant. In 8 years with the company, I had never seen the chairman arrive before 8:30. Rebecca, he greeted me, his tone carrying the particular blend of authority and patronization he reserved for women in the workplace. I thought we might have a private conversation before tomorrow's meeting. I gestured to the chairs across from my desk, maintaining professional composure despite the obvious attempt to catch me off guard. Of course, William. What would you like to discuss? He settled into the chair with the deliberate movements of a man approaching 80 who refused to acknowledge physical limitations. Despite his age, William Sr. remained an imposing figure, tall, silver-haired, with the confident bearing of someone who had spent decades making decisions others implemented without question. I've been reviewing the quarterly reports from our international operations, he began, which immediately alerted me that this conversation had been carefully planned. William Sr. hadn't personally reviewed detailed operational reports in years, preferring high-level executive summaries prepared by James. The performance metrics are impressive, he continued, particularly the manufacturing efficiencies in Singapore and the distribution improvements in Europe. He paused, studying me with assessment honed through decades of business negotiations. You've built something quite remarkable in our international divisions. Thank you, I replied, recognizing the compliment as prelude rather than conclusion. The teams have embraced the regional autonomy model, which has allowed us to adapt quickly to local market conditions. William Sr. nodded, his expression suggesting he was choosing his next words carefully. The board will be considering some organizational changes tomorrow, he said finally. Changes that would affect your current role. He paused, watching for my reaction. When I remained calmly attentive, he continued. I wanted to speak with you directly, as a courtesy. The proposal would transition you to an advisory position, still utilizing your expertise but centralizing operational authority under family leadership. I maintained neutral professionalism despite the thinly veiled attempt to remove me from actual control. I appreciate the courtesy of advance notice. May I ask what business concerns are driving this reorganization? The question was deliberately framed to highlight the distinction between business reasoning and family preference, a distinction William Sr. had always claimed to respect, despite consistent evidence to the contrary. He shifted slightly, the movement revealing discomfort with direct questioning of his decisions. The company has reached a scale where consolidation of leadership is appropriate. International operations represent our largest revenue segment. Now, it's important to integrate them more directly with headquarters strategy. The explanation was classic corporate restructuring language, designed to sound like business rationale while disguising the actual motivation, bringing successful operations under family control once I had built them to profitability. I understand, I replied simply. Will the board be provided with impact assessments showing how this reorganization might affect the operational systems and relationships that drive our international performance? The question wasn't challenging, merely inquiring about standard business diligence for significant organizational changes. William Sr.'s slight hesitation told me what I already knew. No such assessments had been conducted because he and James believed operational systems could simply be transferred to new leadership without consequence. The board will have appropriate information to make an informed decision, he stated, falling back on authority rather than addressing the substance of my question. I wanted you to know that your contributions are valued, Rebecca. This transition isn't a reflection on your performance, but rather an alignment with the company's long-term succession planning. The statement might have seemed generous to someone who hadn't spent years observing how the Blackwells operated, offering public appreciation while systematically consolidating control. I appreciate your transparency, I responded, matching his formal tone, and I look forward to presenting the Global Operations Alignment Plan at tomorrow's meeting. The board will certainly have all the information needed to make decisions in the company's best interests. My careful phrasing mirrored his own, superficially cooperative while revealing nothing of my actual position. William Sr. studied me for a moment longer, perhaps sensing something beneath my professional demeanor that he couldn't quite identify. You've always been remarkably composed, Rebecca, he observed finally. It's a quality I've respected, even when we've disagreed on strategy. The comment seemed genuine, perhaps the closest thing to personal acknowledgement he had offered in our 8-year relationship. Thank you, William. I've always believed that professional effectiveness comes from focusing on systems rather than personalities. My response was equally genuine, though I knew he wouldn't grasp its full significance until after tomorrow's meeting. As he left my office, I returned to my preparation with renewed focus. William Sr.'s unexpected appearance confirmed that the family was concerned enough about tomorrow's outcome to attempt personal intervention. They still believed they were dealing with a straightforward organizational restructuring, rather than the culmination of years of systematic preparation. The misconception would work to my advantage for approximately 24 more hours. The remainder of Thursday passed in a flurry of final preparations. Diane Watkins stopped by my office to confirm that all legal documents were in place and properly filed. Elena Vasquez, my personal attorney, sent confirmation that the additional protections for my individual position had been completed. Vincent Chen in Singapore and Martin Keller in Germany both sent brief messages indicating their teams were prepared for any outcome from tomorrow's meeting. Each communication represented a checkpoint in the comprehensive strategy I had designed to activate when necessary. That evening, Andrew and I maintained our usual Thursday tradition of dinner at Avec, the small plates restaurant that had been our mutual favorite since we first started dating. The familiar warmth of the wood-paneled space and the excellent wine list had provided a neutral setting for many of our most significant conversations over the years. Tonight was no exception. Dad came to see me this afternoon, Andrew mentioned as we settled at our table. He wanted to confirm I understood the strategic importance of tomorrow's vote. His expression suggested the conversation hadn't gone entirely as William Sr. had planned. I told him I would make my decision based on what I believed was best for the company's long-term interests. This was significant. Andrew had historically deferred to his father on major company decisions, despite maintaining independence in his innovation work. And how did he respond? I asked, genuinely curious about William Sr.'s reaction to this unexpected resistance. Andrew allowed himself a small smile. He reminded me of my responsibilities to the family legacy and suggested that personal relationships shouldn't cloud business judgment. He shook his head slightly. The irony of that statement coming from him was apparently lost on my father. As we shared plates of chorizo-stuffed dates and taleggio focaccia, Andrew studied me with the particular attentiveness that had characterized our relationship since rebuilding it on more honest terms. "You're remarkably calm about tomorrow." It wasn't a question, but the observation carried implicit curiosity about my confidence. "I've prepared thoroughly," I replied simply. "Whatever the board decides, I'm ready for the outcome." Andrew nodded, accepting the statement without pressing for details I wasn't prepared to share. Our reconstructed relationship functioned on mutual respect for boundaries. We had learned that complete transparency wasn't necessary for effective partnership. "Rebecca," he said after a moment, "regardless of what happens tomorrow, I want you to know I've learned more from working with you than from anyone else in my professional life. Your approach to building systems rather than just directing people has transformed how I think about innovation." The acknowledgement meant more, coming from Andrew than it might have from others. Despite our personal challenges, he had always respected my professional capabilities, often understanding the depth of my strategic thinking better than his father or brothers did. "Thank you," I replied, genuinely appreciative. "Your willingness to approach problems with creativity rather than tradition has been equally valuable to me." Friday morning arrived with the particular energy that surrounds pivotal moments. I dressed with deliberate care, choosing a structured charcoal suit that projected authority without ostentation, pearl earrings that had been a gift from my mother when I graduated business school, and the platinum watch Andrew had given me on our 5th anniversary. Each element represented a different aspect of the identity I had built: professional achievement, family foundation, and the complex partnership that my marriage had become. I arrived at Blackwell Industries headquarters at precisely 7:30, allowing ample time to review materials before the 9 a.m. board meeting. Thomas was already at his desk, his expression conveying both tension and determination. "Everything is prepared," he informed me, handing over the presentation materials and an updated board packet. The international team sent confirmations that all systems are operating normally. The phrasing was our established code. Confirmation that the contingency protocols were ready to activate if necessary. "Thank you, Thomas," I replied, appreciating his attention to both stated and unstated requirements. "Whatever happens in today's meeting, I want you to know that your contributions have been instrumental to our success." He nodded, understanding the multiple layers in my statement. "It's been an honor to work with you, Ms. Chen. I believe in the systems we've built." At 8:30, I made my way to the boardroom on the top floor of Blackwell headquarters. The space reflected the company's evolution. Traditional mahogany table and leather chairs contrasted with state-of-the-art technology systems I had insisted on installing 2 years ago. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Chicago's skyline, a visual reminder of the company's prominent position in the city's business landscape. I arranged my materials at my designated seat, then stepped out to the adjacent terrace for a final moment of reflection before the meeting began. The morning air carried the particular crispness of late April in Chicago, warmth emerging but not yet dominant, winter's chill not fully retreated. I took a deep breath, centering myself for what would come next. Not with anxiety or resentment, but with the calm certainty that comes from thorough preparation meeting inevitable challenge. The past 4 years had been leading to this moment, when systems carefully designed would activate precisely as intended. At 8:45, board members began arriving. First, Victoria Kane, my former consulting colleague, followed by Robert Chen, relation, a retired manufacturing executive who had joined the board 2 years ago. Then the independent financial directors, Melissa Howard and Jeffrey Parker, engaged in casual conversation about market conditions. Margaret Blackwell Hines arrived next, acknowledging me with a subtle nod that conveyed professional respect. The family members entered as a group: William Sr., James, Michael, and finally Andrew, their unified arrival an unsubtle signal of family alignment. The board meeting began with standard procedural items: approval of previous minutes, review of quarterly financial performance, committee reports. Each followed established protocols, the familiar rhythm of corporate governance providing structure for what would come next. I contributed appropriately to discussions that touched on operational matters, maintaining professional focus despite the underlying currents everyone in the room could sense. At precisely 10:15, according to the agenda, William Sr. introduced the critical item: proposed organizational restructuring, international operations. He spoke with the practiced authority of someone accustomed to having recommendations accepted without significant challenge. The executive committee has reviewed our organizational structure and recommends centralizing operational authority for our international divisions under headquarters leadership. This would include creating a new advisory role focused on international strategy rather than direct operational management. He nodded to James, who advanced to the presentation screen with confident assurance. As we've expanded globally, it's become increasingly important to integrate our international operations more directly with overall company strategy, James began, using the same corporate language his father had tested with me yesterday. The proposed restructuring would establish a more traditional hierarchy while maintaining the expertise that has driven our international success. The presentation that followed was exactly as I had anticipated. Slides outlining a new organizational structure that would effectively remove me from operational authority while maintaining the appearance of valuing my contributions. The Chief International Advisor position would report to James rather than directly to the board, would have no direct reports, and would focus on strategic guidance rather than operational decisions. It was, in corporate terms, a classic sideline maneuver, keeping someone's title while removing their actual authority. When James concluded, William Sr. turned to me with carefully modulated courtesy. "Rebecca, would you like to comment on the proposal before we move to your scheduled presentation?" The question appeared to offer professional respect while actually attempting to force me to respond to their restructuring plan before presenting my own recommendations. It was a subtle but deliberate sequencing intended to position my global operations alignment as a reaction rather than an independent strategy. "Thank you, William," I replied with calm professionalism. "I believe it would be most effective to proceed with my scheduled presentation on global operations alignment. The operational recommendations may provide context that would be valuable for the board's consideration of any structural changes." Several independent directors nodded agreement with this logical approach, and William Sr. had no reasonable basis to object without appearing to depart from proper board procedure. I moved to the presentation screen with deliberate composure. The months of preparation evident in both my confidence and the comprehensive materials I had prepared. Over the past 3 years, Blackwell Industries has transformed from a primarily domestic manufacturer with international sales to a truly global operation with integrated manufacturing and distribution across 3 continents. I began, establishing the business context for what would follow. Our international operations now generate 68% of company revenue and 74% of operating profit. This success has been built on an operational model that emphasizes regional autonomy within a coordinated global framework. I advanced to the next, slide, showing the impressive growth metrics that had resulted from this approach. The independent directors leaned forward slightly. Board members with fiduciary responsibilities always respond to clear financial evidence. The global operations alignment I'm proposing today represents the next evolution of this successful model, I continued, moving through slides that outlined the operational changes with crystal clarity. By further integrating our manufacturing and distribution systems across regions, we can achieve additional efficiencies while maintaining the local responsiveness that has driven our growth. The presentation continued for 20 minutes, each slide building a comprehensive case for operational alignment that appeared to serve exactly the business purposes the company needed. What the slides didn't explicitly show, but what would become clear to anyone who examined the details closely, was how this alignment would crystallize the operational dependencies I had been systematically creating for 4 years. The proposed alignment includes several key components, I explained, reaching the critical section of the presentation. First, consolidating global manufacturing protocols under a unified system administered through our Singapore Operations Center. Second, integrating distribution networks through our European hub to optimize logistics across all markets. Third, centralizing innovation processes through our California Technology Center to ensure consistent product development. Each proposal represented sound business practice, and each would further strengthen the legal frameworks that ensured these critical operations would remain under my effective control regardless of corporate title. The board members followed along with varying degrees of comprehension. The independent directors focused on business outcomes, while the Blackwell family members began to sense, perhaps for the first time, that something more profound than a typical reorganization was being proposed. When I concluded, Victoria Kane was the first to speak. This alignment plan appears to offer significant operational advantages, she observed. The projected efficiency improvements are impressive. Robert Chen nodded agreement. I'm particularly interested in the manufacturing protocol standardization. That's been a challenging goal for many global companies. James leaned forward, his expression suggesting he was beginning to recognize dimensions to my proposal that he hadn't initially perceived. The operational benefits seem clear, he acknowledged carefully, but I'm concerned about the reporting structures. This alignment would further distribute authority rather than centralizing it as our proposal recommends. That's a perceptive observation, I replied with professional courtesy. The alignment is indeed designed around distributed expertise rather than centralized authority. Our international growth has been driven by regional leaders making decisions based on local market conditions within a coordinated framework. This approach has delivered the superior results you've seen in our financial performance. William, Sr. studied me with narrowed eyes, his decades of business experience allowing him to sense that something significant was unfolding beyond a typical strategic presentation. The operational recommendations appear sound, he acknowledged, but they don't address the organizational questions we've raised. Specifically the role you would play in this new alignment versus the advisory position we've proposed. The moment had arrived, the precise point where 4 years of systematic preparation would either activate or prove unnecessary. I met William Sr.'s gaze with calm certainty. That's an important question that the board should consider carefully, I responded. The operational systems I've outlined today are designed to function effectively regardless of organizational titles. However, the board should understand that significant changes to operational authority could have material impacts on our international performance. Margaret Blackwell Hines, who had been listening attentively throughout both presentations, asked the question that would bring everything into focus. Can you clarify what you mean by material impacts, Rebecca? What specifically would be affected by changes to operational authority? I turned to the final slide of my presentation, the one I had prepared but hoped not to need. This diagram shows the legal and operational structures that currently support our international operations. I explained, displaying a simplified version of the complex frameworks I had established. Blackwell Global Operations in Singapore holds the exclusive manufacturing licenses for all our products sold outside North America. Blackwell International Distribution in the Netherlands controls our European and Asian market access. Blackwell Innovation Partners in California owns key patents and process improvements. The board members studied the diagram with varying degrees of comprehension. Michael, with his financial background, was the first to grasp the implications. These entities are structured as independent subsidiaries, he observed, his expression somewhere between concern and reluctant admiration. Each with its own governance and contractual relationships with Blackwell Industries. That's correct, I confirmed. Each entity was established with board approval over the past 4 years. As part of our international expansion, each operates under licensing and service agreements that ensure alignment with Blackwell Industries' overall interests while maintaining necessary operational autonomy. What I didn't explicitly state, but what was becoming clear to the more astute board members, was that these agreements would remain in force regardless of any changes to my position within Blackwell Industries itself. James stood abruptly, his composure cracking as he began to understand the full dimensions of what I had built. These structures effectively separate operational control from corporate ownership, he stated, the accusation clear in his tone. You've created a system where international operations could continue under your direction, regardless of board decisions about your role. I maintained professional calm despite his evident agitation. I've created a system that ensures operational continuity regardless of personnel changes, I corrected gently. Every structure was properly approved by this board, with full legal documentation and business justification. Each serves legitimate business purposes that have driven our exceptional international performance. William Sr.'s expression had transformed from executive authority to something approaching genuine respect. The recognition one strategic thinker gives another when outmaneuvered through superior preparation. You've been building this for years, he said, more statement than question, since long before our discussions about succession planning. I've been building effective operational systems since I joined the company, I replied simply. The structures reflect best practices for global operations in our industry. That they also provide continuity protections is a feature that serves the company's long-term interests. The statement was technically accurate while acknowledging the strategic reality that was now evident to everyone in the room. The board meeting proceeded for another 40 minutes, with detailed discussions about the implications of both proposed approaches. The independent directors asked pointed questions about operational dependencies, legal structures, and financial implications. The Blackwell family members struggled to reconcile their planned organizational changes with the operational realities I had systematically created. Throughout it all, I maintained professional focus, addressing each question with factual clarity, while allowing the full dimensions of my preparation to gradually become apparent. When William Sr. finally called for a vote, the outcome reflected the new reality everyone in the room now understood. My global operations alignment was approved, by a 7-2 margin, with only William Sr. and James opposing. The family's proposed restructuring of my role was tabled indefinitely, with even Michael abstaining rather than supporting a change that could potentially disrupt the company's most profitable operations. As the board meeting concluded and members began gathering their materials, Margaret approached me with a subtle smile that conveyed both professional respect and personal appreciation. That, she said quietly, was the most elegant example of strategic preparation I've ever witnessed. Not aggressive, not confrontational, simply thoroughly designed to ensure the right outcome. Thank you, Margaret, I replied with genuine appreciation for her perception. I've always believed that effective systems speak for themselves once properly understood. She nodded, understanding the philosophy that had guided my approach. "The family underestimated you from the beginning," she observed. "They saw technical expertise rather than strategic vision." As I left the boardroom, walking past the executive offices toward my own space, I felt none of the triumph or vindication that might be expected after such a definitive outcome. Instead, I experienced the calm satisfaction that comes from seeing carefully designed systems function exactly as intended when finally activated. The Blackwells had made their choice when they decided to exclude me from the family inheritance and limit my corporate authority. I had made mine when I decided to build structures that would function regardless of their personal feelings toward me. The company would continue operating effectively. The international divisions would maintain their impressive performance, and I would retain operational control of the systems I had built, regardless of what the Blackwell family had planned, for their will or their family succession. Not through confrontation or conflict, but through systematic preparation meeting inevitable challenge. The path forward was now clear, and I had designed every step. 6 months after the pivotal board meeting, Blackwell Industries had transformed, in ways even I hadn't fully anticipated. The global operations alignment had exceeded performance projections, with manufacturing efficiency improving 22% and distribution costs decreasing 17% across all international markets. Our European expansion had accelerated beyond initial timelines, with 3 new countries added to our distribution network. The Singapore Operations Hub had become a model studied by business schools for its innovative integration of regional autonomy with global coordination. On this crisp October morning, I stood at the window of my expanded office suite, significantly larger than the space I had occupied 6 months ago, watching Chicago's skyline emerge from dawn fog. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Clarity emerging from confusion, definitive shapes becoming visible after a period of obscurity. The company had similarly emerged from its own fog of divided leadership and conflicting visions, consolidating around the operational excellence that now drove our global success. My reflections were interrupted by a soft knock. Thomas entered with my daily briefing portfolio and a subtle smile that had become more common as our operational transformation solidified. "Good morning, Ms. Chen. The quarterly reports are complete, and the numbers are exceptional. Also, Mr. Blackwell Sr. has requested a meeting at 10 Bao. I accepted the portfolio with a nod of appreciation. "Thank you, Thomas. Please confirm the meeting with William." The past 6 months had been fascinating from an organizational psychology perspective. After the board meeting revealed the full dimensions of the operational infrastructure I had built, the Blackwell family had cycled through predictable emotional stages, from shock to anger to, finally, a reluctant reassessment of reality. William Sr. had been the first to adapt, his decades of business experience allowing him to recognize when strategic repositioning was necessary. James had maintained stubborn resistance longer, continuing to probe for vulnerabilities in my operational framework before eventually accepting the new dynamic. The quarterly executive committee meeting at 8:30 reflected these evolved relationships. I entered the conference room to find the leadership team already assembled: James and Michael Blackwell, our divisional presidents, and key functional leaders. Where tension and political maneuvering had once characterized these gatherings, a more pragmatic collaboration had emerged, not from sudden personal affection, but from clear recognition of operational realities and interdependencies. "Let's begin with the International Performance Review," James suggested, his tone professional if not warm. "The Asia-Pacific numbers are particularly strong this quarter." He nodded in my direction, acknowledging the results without unnecessary commentary. This was our new normal: professional respect divorced from personal dynamics, recognition of results without pretense of family connection. "Singapore manufacturing exceeded targets by 14%, I confirmed, advancing to the relevant slides in our shared presentation. "The standardized production protocols we implemented have eliminated variability across regional operations. Quality metrics are at historical highs, while unit costs have decreased 9% year over year. The executive team reviewed the data with appropriate professional interest, asking substantive questions about sustainability and scalability. Michael, who had perhaps adjusted most successfully among the Blackwells to our new operational reality, built on my presentation with complimentary financial analysis. The operational efficiencies have translated directly to margin improvement, he noted, displaying trend lines that confirmed the correlation. We're seeing 280 basis points of margin expansion across all international markets. This is providing increased resources for the innovation investments Andrew's team has proposed. The discussion continued with productive focus on business results rather than organizational politics. This represented the most positive outcome from the board confrontation. A shift from family dynamics to professional effectiveness, from personality-driven decisions to data-supported strategies. Not because the Blackwells had suddenly embraced me as one of their own, but because the operational systems I had built had proven their value so definitively that emotional preferences became irrelevant beside business results. After the executive committee adjourned, I returned to my office to prepare for my meeting with William Sr. The past 6 months had transformed our relationship in unexpected ways. Following the board meeting, he had retreated briefly to regroup and reassess. Then, with the pragmatism that had built Blackwell Industries through multiple economic cycles, he had approached me with a proposal for coexistence based on clear recognition of our respective positions. At precisely 10 Diao, my assistant announced his arrival. William Sr. entered with the dignified bearing that had characterized his business presence for decades, though recent events had softened the patriarchal authority into something closer, to professional respect. "Rebecca," he greeted me, accepting my gesture toward the seating area by the window rather than the more formal arrangement at my desk. This small choice of settings reflected our evolved relationship, no longer hierarchical in either direction, but a partnership of necessity between strategic equals. "The quarterly results are impressive," he began, acknowledging the business reality that had come to define our interaction. "Particularly the Eastern European expansion. The Warsaw operation has ramped up more quickly than projected." I nodded, appreciating his focus on substantive business matters rather than personal dynamics. The regional director we promoted internally had established relationships that accelerated the regulatory approvals. Another benefit of our distributed leadership model. William Sr. allowed himself a small smile at this subtle reminder of the operational approach he had once resisted. "Your leadership model has proven its effectiveness," he acknowledged. "The board has been reviewing the 3-year projections based on current performance trajectories. The growth potential is substantial." He paused, studying me with the assessment that came from decades of business negotiations, which brings me to the purpose of this meeting. He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a slim leather portfolio. "These are the revised documents from the family trust," he explained, placing them on the table between us. "As discussed with the lawyers, they reflect the new operational reality while preserving certain family interests." I opened the portfolio, reviewing documents I had already seen in draft form, but which now carried official signatures and legal certification. The revised trust documents represented the compromise we had negotiated over several months following the board confrontation. They acknowledged my operational control of the international divisions while maintaining Blackwell family ownership of company shares. They established clear protocols for decision-making that respected both ownership rights and operational dependencies. Most significantly, they included me in the family inheritance structure to a limited but defined extent, not from sudden familial affection, but from recognition of business reality. "The documents appear to be as agreed," I confirmed, maintaining professional focus rather than emotional reaction. "I appreciate the constructive approach everyone has taken to resolving these issues." William Sr. nodded, his expression reflecting not warmth, but a certain respect that hadn't existed before. "James has signed as well, though it took some additional convincing," He's still adjusting to the new dynamic. I imagine that's challenging, I acknowledged, neither celebrating nor minimizing the family adjustments my strategy had necessitated. Change is difficult even when benefits are clear. The quarterly results should help demonstrate that this arrangement serves everyone's interests. William Sr. studied me with the particular assessment of someone who had underestimated an opponent and was still recalibrating his understanding. "You planned this outcome from the beginning, didn't you?" he asked finally, curiosity overcoming his usual reserve. "Not just protecting your position, but creating systems that would eventually force us to recognize your value in concrete terms." The question wasn't accusatory, but genuinely interested. One strategic thinker acknowledging another's effectiveness. I considered how to respond authentically without unnecessary detail. "I built operational systems that would function effectively regardless of personal dynamics," I replied. "The structures reflect best practices for global operations while ensuring continuity through any leadership transitions. That they also clarified certain realities about control and dependency was a natural consequence of their design." William Sr. nodded, accepting this carefully balanced response for the partial truth it represented. We both understood there had been more deliberate strategy involved, but neither had anything to gain from explicit acknowledgement. "The family underestimated you," he said after a moment. "We saw technical expertise rather than strategic vision. An error in assessment I won't make again." As he prepared to leave, he paused at the door with an observation that suggested deeper reflection than I might have expected. "You know, Rebecca, in 50 years of building this company, I've learned that the most valuable business lessons often come from unexpected sources. Your approach has been educational for all of us." Coming from William Sr., this represented significant acknowledgement, not personal acceptance, but professional respect, hard-earned through strategic effectiveness. After he left, I returned to the window, watching Chicago's business district hum with midday activity. The conversation had clarified something important about leadership and value creation. My worth to Blackwell Industries hadn't ultimately been established through family connection or emotional appeal, but through creating systems of such demonstrable value that they commanded respect regardless of personal feelings. This was perhaps the purest form of professional validation, recognition based entirely on effectiveness rather than affiliation. My reflections were interrupted by a calendar notification for my lunch meeting with Margaret Blackwell Hines. Unlike the rest of her family, Margaret had maintained friendly professional relations with me throughout the transition, appreciating the strategic elegance of my approach without taking personal offense at its implications. We had established a monthly lunch tradition that provided valuable perspective from someone who understood both family dynamics and business realities. We met at a small French bistro equidistant between our offices, a neutral space that had become comfortable through repetition. Margaret arrived in her signature architect's black, her creative profession evident in both her appearance and perspective. "The family signed the revised trust documents," she noted as we settled at our table. "Dad actually seemed relieved to have resolution." "We reached a reasonable accommodation," I agreed, appreciating her direct approach to sensitive topics. The quarterly results helped demonstrate that the new operational structure benefits everyone. Margaret studied me with the perceptive assessment that characterized her approach to both buildings and people, seeing structural elements that others missed. "You've achieved something remarkable, Rebecca," she observed. "Not just building exceptional operational systems, but forcing a traditional family business to recognize value beyond bloodlines and surnames. That's genuinely transformative." Her observation captured something essential about what had transpired, a shift in how value and contribution were measured within a traditional structure. "It wasn't my original intention," I acknowledged. "When I first joined the company, I genuinely hoped to build value within the family framework. The protective structures came later, when I recognized certain realities about how contribution would be valued. This was perhaps the most candid I had been with anyone about my evolution from ambitious family member to strategic independent operator. Margaret nodded, understanding the progression. The family's inability to fully value what you were building created the very conditions that necessitated your independent approach. There's an architectural lesson there about how structures influence behavior, and behavior then requires new structures. Her perspective offered a framework for understanding the past 6 months that transcended personal dynamics, seeing patterns that applied beyond our specific situation. "What happens next?" she asked, genuine curiosity in her tone. "You've established operational control and formal recognition. The business is thriving under the new model. What's your vision for the future?" The question was perceptive, acknowledging that strategic thinkers don't simply react to immediate challenges, but build toward longer horizons. I considered her question thoughtfully. The next evolution is geographic expansion beyond our current regions. We've established the operational model in Europe and Asia Pacific. Now we can apply those systems to South America and eventually Africa. The framework scales effectively because it balances global consistency with regional adaptation. This represented my professional vision, continuing to build operational excellence that would further strengthen my position through demonstrated value creation. "And personally?" Margaret pressed gently. "You and Andrew have found an unusual balance in your relationship. Has that evolved as well with these business changes?" The question touched on the parallel transformation that had occurred in my marriage alongside the professional developments. "We've continued our pragmatic partnership," I replied, appreciating her genuine interest. "The business resolution has actually clarified certain aspects of our relationship. With professional roles and expectations defined more explicitly, we've found a personal equilibrium that works on its own terms." This was truthful without being unnecessarily detailed. Andrew and I had indeed developed a clearer understanding as professional boundaries became more established. After lunch, I returned to the office for an afternoon of strategic planning sessions with regional directors connecting virtually from across 3 continents. The quarterly business review had validated our operational approach, and now we needed to refine plans for the coming year. These sessions represented the heart of the operational model I had built: collaborative planning within clear frameworks, distributed leadership with coordinated direction, regional autonomy with global alignment. Vincent Chen from Singapore, Martin Keller from Germany, and Isabella Rodriguez from our emerging Brazilian operations appeared on screen, each bringing regional expertise to our shared strategic discussion. These relationships formed the foundation of our international success: leaders who understood both local markets and global integration, who respected my strategic direction while contributing their specialized knowledge. The quarterly results demonstrate the effectiveness of our operational model, I began, establishing context for our planning discussion. Now we need to build on that foundation for the coming year. Let's start with manufacturing optimization across regions. The conversation flowed with professional focus and mutual respect, each leader contributing perspectives shaped by their regional experience within our shared framework. As the planning session progressed, I reflected on how these operational relationships differed from the family dynamics that had previously dominated Blackwell Industries. These leaders valued my strategic direction because it demonstrably improved their results, not because of organizational title or family connection. Their commitment came from shared success rather than obligation or tradition. This represented a fundamentally different leadership model, one based on demonstrated value rather than positional authority. After the international calls concluded, I had one final meeting scheduled: a monthly check-in with Andrew regarding innovation pipeline and operational integration. Our professional relationship had evolved alongside our personal one, finding a productive balance that served both the company's interests and our individual goals. The meeting took place in his innovation lab, rather than either of our offices, neutral territory that emphasized collaborative work rather than hierarchical. Reporting. The Brazilian expansion is progressing well, I noted as we reviewed integration plans for new product lines. Isabella's team is adapting the operational model effectively to local conditions. Andrew nodded, studying the implementation timeline with the focused attention he brought to technical details. The modular manufacturing process we developed should transfer smoothly. We've designed the components specifically for regional adaptation. Our professional interaction reflected the evolved understanding we had reached personally: respect for each other's distinct expertise, clear communication, about shared objectives and honest acknowledgement of potential conflicts. We had found that this transparent approach actually produced better results than our earlier attempts at perfect alignment had ever achieved. By acknowledging our separate perspectives, we could integrate them more effectively into comprehensive solutions. As the workday concluded, I completed a final review of presentation materials for tomorrow's board meeting. 6 months after the confrontation that had redefined company dynamics, the quarterly board meeting would demonstrate the tangible business benefits of our new operational model. The financial results spoke for themselves: record profitability, accelerated growth, and improved market position across all regions. These outcomes transcended family politics, providing objective validation of the systems I had built. The drive home through Chicago's evening traffic provided time for reflection on the journey of the past 6 months, and the longer 4-year path that had led to this moment. What had begun as defensive preparation against potential exclusion had evolved into a comprehensive operational transformation that had strengthened the company while securing my position within it, not through conflict or confrontation, but through creating systems of such demonstrable value that they commanded respect regardless of personal feelings. As I entered our lakefront condominium, I found Andrew already home, opening a bottle of wine in the kitchen. "I thought we should celebrate," he explained, pouring 2 glasses of a Premier Napa Cabernet we both enjoyed. "The quarterly results are exceptional, and the board presentation tomorrow should go smoothly." His acknowledgement of our shared professional success reflected our evolved relationship. Appreciation for accomplishment, without the complicated emotional entanglements that had once characterized our marriage. We moved to the balcony with our wine, watching evening settle over Lake Michigan. The October air carried autumn's crispness, a transitional season that seemed fitting for our circumstances. "I spoke with Dad today after your meeting," Andrew mentioned. "He seems to have reached a certain peace with the new arrangements. Even James has stopped looking for ways to undermine the operational structure." "The financial results help," I observed. "It's difficult to argue with record profitability and market expansion." Andrew nodded, appreciating the pragmatic assessment. "It's more than that, though. They've come to respect what you've built, even if they wouldn't express it directly." Dad actually used the word impressive in describing the Eastern European implementation. Coming from William Sr., this represented significant acknowledgement, not personal acceptance, but professional respect hard-earned through demonstrated effectiveness. After a moment, Andrew added something unexpected. He also mentioned revising his personal will, separate from the family trust. He didn't share details, but he said something about recognizing contributions appropriately that suggested it might include provisions for you. This was surprising, not because I had sought such recognition, but because it indicated an evolution in William Sr.'s thinking beyond mere business accommodation. "That's unexpected," I acknowledged, "though probably more symbolic than substantial at this point." Andrew agreed. "The operational control you've established is far more significant than any inheritance provision, but symbols matter in family businesses." As darkness settled over the lake, our conversation shifted to future possibilities rather than past challenges. The operational framework I had built was proving not just defensible, but expandable. creating opportunities for growth beyond anything the Blackwells had envisioned when they had planned to limit my authority. The South American expansion was already exceeding projections. African market entry was becoming viable years ahead of original timelines. The innovation pipeline Andrew's team had developed was finding faster paths to market through our integrated operational systems. "What's your long-term vision?" Andrew asked, echoing Margaret's earlier question but from his unique perspective as both family member and innovation leader. "Now that you've secured operational control and formal recognition, where do you want to take this?" The question invited strategic thinking beyond immediate tactical considerations. I considered thoughtfully before responding. "I see Blackwell Industries evolving into a truly global enterprise rather than an American company with international sales. That means distributed leadership centers across regions, innovation hubs on multiple continents, and manufacturing capabilities that can adapt to local conditions while maintaining global standards." This vision represented not just business expansion, but philosophical evolution, from centralized control to coordinated autonomy, from tradition-bound heritage to adaptive capability. "That's a radical departure from the company my grandfather built," Andrew observed, though his tone suggested interest rather than resistance. "But it's probably the only sustainable path forward in today's global environment." His willingness to envision transformation rather than merely protecting tradition had always been what distinguished him from his father and brothers. The ability to see beyond established patterns to emerging possibilities. As we prepared for dinner, moving through the comfortable routines of our reconstructed relationship, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. From ambitious young professional to strategic operator building parallel systems. From passionate newlywed to pragmatic partner with clear boundaries. From outsider seeking family acceptance to independent leader commanding professional respect. None of these transitions had followed the path I had initially envisioned, but each had contributed to outcomes that now seemed both inevitable and appropriate. The following morning, I prepared for the board meeting with calm confidence rather than strategic tension. 6 months after the confrontation that had redefined company dynamics, this quarterly review would demonstrate the tangible business benefits of our new operational model. The financial results spoke for themselves: record profitability, accelerated growth, and improved market position across all regions. These outcomes transcended family politics, providing objective validation of the systems I had built. As I dressed in a precisely chosen outfit that projected confident authority without ostentation, I reflected on the fundamental lesson of my experience. True power in modern business doesn't come from titles or family connections, but from building systems of such demonstrable value that they command respect regardless of personal feelings. My worth to Blackwell Industries hadn't ultimately been established through inheritance rights or emotional appeal, but through creating operational frameworks that transformed company performance so definitively that they couldn't be dismantled without destroying value. Arriving at the boardroom 30 minutes before the scheduled meeting, I arranged my presentation materials with methodical precision. The space itself reflected the company's evolution, traditional elements honoring heritage alongside contemporary technology enabling global operation. Board members began arriving, each greeting me with the particular respect I had earned through demonstrated effectiveness rather than granted position. William Sr. entered last, nodding acknowledgement as he took his seat at the head of the table. "The quarterly results are impressive, Rebecca," he noted, his tone carrying the professional respect that had replaced his earlier patronizing attitude. "Particularly the accelerated timeline on the Eastern European implementation." I thanked him with appropriate professional courtesy, appreciating the acknowledgement without over-interpreting its personal significance. As the board meeting progressed through its agenda, the transformed dynamics were evident in every interaction. The independent directors addressed me with the particular attention reserved for proven value creators. The family members maintained professional focus on business outcomes rather than personal dynamics. The discussion reflected a collective recognition that operational excellence transcended family politics, that results ultimately mattered more than relationships in business evaluation. When I presented the International Performance Review, the numbers told their own compelling story. Manufacturing efficiency improved 22% year over year. Distribution costs reduced 17% across all markets. Market share expanded in every region where we had implemented the new operational model. New product introduction timelines shortened by 35% through the integrated development process. Each metric represented validated business value that existed, independent of any personal feelings about its creator. After the meeting concluded successfully, with unanimous approval of our expansion plans for the coming year, Margaret approached with the particular smile that suggested appreciation beyond mere business results. "You've transformed how value is measured in a traditional family business," she observed. "That's a legacy that will outlast any operational system or financial result." Her perception captured something essential about what had transpired. A fundamental shift in how contribution was evaluated within a heritage-bound structure. As I gathered my materials to return to my office, William Sr. paused beside me with an observation that suggested deeper reflection than I might have expected from someone his age. "You know, Rebecca, in building this company over 50 years, I've learned that the most valuable legacy isn't financial inheritance, or even family tradition. It's creating systems that outlive individual leadership, structures that continue producing value beyond any single person's contribution." His statement acknowledged, perhaps unconsciously, the parallel between his own life's work building Blackwell Industries and my strategic creation of operational systems that would function regardless of personal authority. Not through emotional connection, but through shared understanding of how lasting value is created and sustained. "That's a perspective I appreciate, William," I replied, recognizing the unexpected common ground between our otherwise different approaches. Returning to my office, I found a small package on my desk with a note from Andrew. Inside was a custom-designed compass in a sleek modern case, with an inscription that read, "For finding true north in uncharted territory." The gift acknowledged both personal and professional journeys, navigating relationship complexity while simultaneously charting new operational directions. I smiled at his characteristic ability to express complex ideas through tangible symbols. As afternoon sunlight streamed through my office windows, illuminating the quarterly reports that validated our operational transformation, I reflected on the fundamental truth my experience had revealed. The Blackwells had made their choice. When they decided to exclude me from the family inheritance and limit my corporate authority, believing that legal ownership equated to actual control, I had made mine when I decided to build systems that would function based on demonstrated value rather than granted position. The result wasn't conflict or confrontation, but transformation of the company, of family dynamics, and of my own understanding of effective leadership. Not through emotional appeal or political maneuvering, but through creating operational excellence that commanded respect regardless of personal feelings. The family who had excluded me from their will now found themselves dependent on the systems I controlled, not because I had sought revenge, but because I had built something of superior value. As I reviewed plans for our next international expansion, I felt neither triumph nor vindication, but the quiet satisfaction that comes from seeing carefully designed systems function exactly as intended. The Blackwell family had underestimated what I was building while focusing on who would inherit their legacy. They had failed to recognize that in the modern business environment, effective operational control ultimately matters more than legal ownership, that systems outlast structures, and value transcends title. The family that had excluded me from their will hadn't realized they were simultaneously making me essential to their future, a paradox of their own creation, and the foundation of my quiet victory. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.